it looks like employers are trying to really meet the needs of their employees, and there's some hoops they need to jump through. What are they doing to make their employees happy right now?
Well, we're at a bit of a phase, aren't we, where we're hearing about different organizations across the spectrum starting to put into place some plans for getting their teams back in the office. You know, we heard from some of the Wall Street banks that talking about full returns to the office for all staff, but on a staggered basis, because offices are still restricted in the capacity that they can take during COVID restrictions. And on the other end of the spectrum, you've got smaller organizations, nimble startups, less sort of big money organizations that are equally doing that, but from perhaps a position where they are looking to liberalize or more change the way that their working culture. So these kind of different organizations are colliding in the middle right now. For a very small period of time, the sort of hybrid model of perhaps 2-3 days a week in the office works almost for everybody. The key question is, how are organizations and board members, executives, what are they actually planning to do when they get those people back in the office? Are they drawing up plans or guidelines for how people will work differently with meetings and remote, some people remotely, some people at home? What's the purpose of office life going to be when we go back? And how flexible will it really be? Is it about location, being in the office, or is it about time? Will you shift the times, the hours, the types of work that you're going to do? There's a whole load of questions, and many people are quite concerned that different businesses are taking them seriously along a spectrum. You know, some very seriously, some not yet quite grasped the all-encompassing nature of the change.
Yeah, a lot of questions and not necessarily a lot of answers at this point. And come on in here, Kara, because Adam brings up a really good point. There's not really this one-size-fits-all approach, at least from the company perspective, because what works for a small company may not work for a big company. But I think it's even more complicated than that, and it's something that you've explored too, because there's not a one-size-fits-all approach to employees, because the idea of flexibility or hybrid work might mean something different to one employee sitting next to another employee.
Absolutely. I think, companies have to look at it, particularly these big companies with a wide range of employees doing a range of different things. They're not going to be able to have a one-size-fits-all approach. It's going to be, there are certain banks that they have to have traders back in the office to comply with regulatory standards. They had to bend the rules during the pandemic, and so they just have to be in the office to meet regulations. Whereas, you have engineers who are perfectly happy coding at home, and they don't see any need to come back. And those are a highly in-demand field right now for hiring. So, companies are going to have to be flexible with those types of workers, or else risk losing them. So companies have to look at sort of the types of workers they have and who's going to want to be flex, and that raises a whole lot of issues in itself within each company.
Well, Kara, build on that a little bit, because one thing that I'm interested in is the idea of this hybrid work and flexibility and who that could really leave out. Because here in the U.S., one thing that we've learned is that women have really have not gotten any of the jobs, at least in the latest jobs report. And a big part of that has to do with work disproportionately falling on them in the household, the idea that schools aren't open again. And then I'm wondering, in this hybrid environment, who this leaves behind.
Absolutely. There was an Accenture study out saying about 29% of women in financial services had to take some sort of leave or even leave their jobs during the pandemic. And of course, all companies across all industries are making efforts to elevate women and minorities and people in roles to enhance diversity. And, particularly women and men too, parents who I think have found that this remote work environment, one of the positives has been, more time with their kids, less time commuting, and might want that flexibility more. That's a huge thing companies will have to deal with is, accommodating them, trying to keep them happy, but also making sure that they're not left behind and kind of pushed aside in favor of people who are in the office.
Adam, I'm curious as to how this is working in the rest of the world. Places that are maybe a little faster in their progress, like Israel, and what the rest of the world can learn from places like that in terms of the flexibility that is able to be offered in this post-pandemic life.
Yeah, I mean, we did a piece recently. We heard from employers and real estate agents and co-working spaces in Israel that, before the recent conflict started, of course, there was significant numbers of people returning to the office. We were seeing queues at lunch spots, a little bit, life coming back to normal. Rents were recovering, Whereas last year, a company trying to take space in a co-working space in Tel Aviv was able to strike a good deal, really, to kind of get a cheap lease agreement for 2020. That's not happening so much anymore. So those real estate agents and business premises over there are seeing a rebound. Caveat, obviously, there's an ongoing situation, but and that's a little template. That country was ahead of the curve for vaccinations, ahead of the UK, it sort of mirrored the UK both in lockdowns and in vaccinations. So we're looking there to see whether that's a kind of behaviour that will be mirrored over here in this country.
Kara, I'm curious as to how these geographic differences are changing where people may want to work. For example, you've told us that San Francisco is way behind on return to office. Both San Francisco and New York are just simply expensive places to live and work. Are people reassessing where they work and where they live?
Yeah, I think that's a huge part of it. Yes, according to Castle Systems, which tracks security swipes at buildings, San Francisco only has about 16% of workers back. New York is also very low, whereas you look at places like Texas, it's about close to 40%. That has, of course, a lot to do with local restrictions and public transport, I'd say. Texas is a lot more driving area. But, there's definitely been, as a whole, migration, people leaving expensive areas like San Francisco and New York because their companies have adopted more remote policies. So, that could really change how cities look, and it's a big unknown. In San Francisco, there's a record amount of sublease space on the market, more than during the financial crisis, more than during the dot-com bust, because tech companies are deciding they just don't need as much office space. So that kind of builds on itself. If you have a lot of, employers in a city saying you don't have to work remotely, the other employers that you do have to work remotely, other employers might follow suit, and it's hard for them to say you must be in the office 5 days a week. So kind of what I think other employers in geographic areas are doing, it might also have a big role in sort of the future of flexible working.
Adam, all of this is happening at a time when a lot of employers are thinking about ways that they can diversify their workforces from a racial perspective, from a gender perspective. And I'm wondering how this plays out, and to what extent that effort is complicated by some sort of hybrid return to work, and the idea of, hey, we're really experimenting here. We really don't know what's going on. We really don't know the right way to do this.
Well, I've spoken to executives, and the prevailing thinking is actually that there's an opportunity here. There's an opportunity here for certainly in the UK, where previously people might have been, and it is mainly women. It is mainly women and people from different locations around the country who felt unable, perhaps, to take on a lengthy commute to London. Where a lot of the biggest businesses are obviously based, but nowadays with the prospect of moving to a hybrid system where you could work 2 or perhaps 3 days in a central location, those commutes are a little less daunting. There's obviously wrinkles. If a top-down kind of timetable is imposed on staff, that can be really disruptive for people's family lives, for childcare, or for other commitments that they have. But I've definitely heard from hiring managers that applicants are coming forward, and there's been an increase in the number of job postings with the word either flexible or remote, and that's changing over time. But that opportunity opportunity to be able to do the job in a more flexible way than was previously possible is, in theory, attractive and could be a diversity benefit. But as you say, there are lots of experiments happening all at the same time, and it would be really easy for companies to take a misstep on this, and sometimes, hopefully not deliberately, but inadvertently put in place a policy, a restrictive policy, for example, around meetings in person on specific days. That could have a knock-on effect. It's a bit of a minefield at the moment, and companies would probably be mindful to let their employees know that they don't know everything.